Hi, everybody. I am Dr. F. Prey Wilson of the Yale School of Medicine, and once again coming at you fresh with new data that's being presented to the Vaccine-Related Biological Products Advisory Committee meeting. This time we're talking about the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine. Most of these results have not been seen before, so pretty exciting, and we're going to tear through it together real quick. I'll make myself small. So the Vaccine-Related Biological Products Advisory Committee is the group at the FDA who will decide whether this vaccine should get an emergency use authorization. That meeting is on February 26th. I'm recording this on February 24th, so this was just released in advance of that meeting. Really interesting data in here. We'll go through it together. Just to remind people about the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine. Janssen is a subgroup within Johnson & Johnson. The AD26-CoV2S vaccine, AD26 stands for adenovirus 26. This is an adenovirus vector vaccine. Adenoviruses cause the common cold, they cause conjunctivitis, pink eye, stuff like that. Many of us have had adenovirus in the past, good at infecting human cells. And so what they've done with adenovirus 26 is they've removed a gene from that virus that makes it able to grow. So it cannot replicate itself. It's called replication incompetent. They've replaced that gene with the spike protein gene from coronavirus. So these adenoviruses are grown up in a vat and they express the spike protein. So they get injected, your immune system sees that spike protein in the context of the adenovirus, builds up the immune response against the spike protein, but that adenovirus can't take root in your system because the gene that allows it to reproduce has been removed. So it's a bit different than the mRNA viruses where your cells are making the spike protein. In this case, the virus itself has the spike protein on it already. So a bit of a different mechanism here than the other ones we've talked about. So let's zoom in, and what I'm going to do is just go really quickly through the important tables and figures. There's obviously a lot in this document, and I will put a link in the description of the video so you can read it yourself. It's public access for everyone, but there's a lot to go through, and I often find it's easiest just to look at the tables and try to highlight what is particularly important here. So table 1 just tells you about the ongoing studies that they are talking about. Basically, most of the data we're going to be talking about here comes from study 3001, which is the big 40,000 adult study. It's a single dose regimen. You can see there's a 2-dose regimen study that's ongoing, and then there's some smaller studies that we're looking at safety and immunogenicity, some more mechanistic studies. But the big one here is this 40,000 adult study. It's of similar size to the Pfizer and mRNA studies. What you're going to get here are some case definitions, which is like all the other vaccine trials, looking for a positive PCR test for coronavirus and some symptoms, right? So not feeling well. You could have one severe symptom, or you could have 2 less severe symptoms. So this is symptomatic COVID-19, and then there's some definitions for severe COVID-19 and critical COVID-19, which we'll get to. All right, so let's go a little bit further and talk here about table 3. I'll let you all look at this. This is basically saying, how much follow-up do they have in the various cohorts? So what percent have at least 8 weeks of follow-up in these various age groups and things like that? It's not going to affect materially our analysis of the early results yet. So I'm going to skip through this. This is telling us a little bit about the safety analysis population. So what happened to people who had a safety event, were unblinded to treatment, discontinued from the study and whatnot. You can see briefly, and we'll get much more detail here, that discontinuation happened a little bit more often actually in the placebo group, which might happen because someone got unblinded, heard they were in the placebo group, and were like, okay, forget about this. I don't want to do this anymore. All right. Um, Okay, so let's start getting to the demographic characteristics of the population that was enrolled here. So we've got median age of 52 years. The youngest is 18, the oldest up to 100 years old. So no kids in this study. Keep that in mind. And this just breaks down by age group. So you can see not too many people greater than age 75, but you got a good 65 plus population, 20%, pretty good. A little more men than women, but that's okay. And then the racial breakdown looks like, you've got 60% white, you've got 17% black, 3 or 4% Asian, and actually a surprisingly decent number of Native American or Alaskan Inuit population. That's surprising. Okay, good for them. So that's pretty diverse. You've got a good number of people of Hispanic ethnicity here, which is great. That comes obviously from enrolling a lot of people in Latin America, but you can see half the population here of this trial is from the United States. And 40% of the population has at least one comorbidity, 60% doesn't. And when we break that down, you'll see that this is not the sickest group in the world, but that's often typical for a large phase 3 trial like this. This is the full analysis set, basically the same data and the same results. So again, just kind of breaking it down. Bit more information here, though, which is the rate of serostatus at baseline. So interesting here, right? So these are people who had antibodies to SARS-CoV-2 at baseline, 10% in both groups. So that's prior infection at baseline. That's a pretty high number, which might reflect the fact that, here's this trial that is ongoing. But interesting to note. All right, in terms of comorbidities, as I said, 60% of people have no comorbidities, but of the comorbidities that people do have, sorry, I'm in the way, of the comorbidities that people do have, the typical stuff, you got 10% with hypertension, 28% with obesity, only 7% with diabetes. I wish we had seen more diabetics in this population, and then kind of a smattering of other comorbidities. But, honestly, pretty healthy group here. COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, people who might be at particular risk of infection, of bad outcomes if they get infected with the coronavirus, and just 1%. It's not a ton, again, pretty healthy population. What that means is we're not going to see a ton of really bad outcomes in this trial because the people with more comorbidities aren't being enrolled. Okay, so here we are, table 10, the primary efficacy analysis. So this is the sort of top line, big results here. So I'll walk you through this in a little bit more detail. So this is the efficacy against centrally confirmed moderate to severe COVID-19. So remember, you've got a positive test and you've got some symptoms that make you feel sick. Doesn't mean you're hospitalized, but this is like the real deal COVID-19. And they look at a start time of 14 days after vaccination and 28 days after vaccination. And you want to look at this column here, vaccine efficacy and vaccine efficacy here. And you can see pretty similar efficacy, honestly. 67% after 14 days, 66% after 28 days. Those are functionally the same. You can see the confidence interval here ranging from 59 to 73%. FDA had previously set 50% as their threshold for vaccine efficacy, so I think this certainly clears that bar. And when you break it down, you see, if anything, a little higher efficacy in the greater than or equal to 60-year group, but this might be within just the range of expected variation, and you can see that by the time you get out 28 days, the efficacy is 66%. So we got about 70% efficacy here. That is not the 95% efficacy you're seeing with the mRNA vaccines, but remember, those were 2 doses. This is only 1 single dose. This vaccine also, I should mention, can just be refrigerated in a standard freezer. Doesn't need those super cold conditions that some of the mRNA vaccines need. So this might be a great choice to get vaccines out there really quickly. Very good top-line results here. Okay, this table 11 is telling you what about the people who got sick with COVID-19. So what we would expect from a table like this is that the people who catch COVID-19 tend to have more comorbidities and things like that. This isn't really telling us about the efficacy of the vaccine in any way. It's telling us of the people who got COVID-19, what were they like? And it's the typical risk factors that you would often see. All right. So some sensitivity analyses here. So what table 12 is looking at is the same as that prior table, but now breaking down by some different categories and including non-centrally confirmed cases. So these might be people who had positive PCR tests locally, like at their local hospital or something like that. But that was not confirmed by the central lab. So, is there misclassification of cases here? Maybe, potentially, but it's probably not too bad. And what you see overall in this analysis, again, about 70% efficacy, maybe slightly higher in men, although again, probably within just the range of expected variation by random chance. By age group here, interesting, this is for the first time we're seeing the greater than 75-year-old age group, and there's just not many patients here. So you got one case developing within 14 days, but not within 28 days. One case in a greater than 75-year-old in the vaccine group, 9 in the placebo group. And then once you're outside of 28 days, you've got 0 cases in the vaccine group and 4 in the placebo group. That's 100% efficacy, but that's too few numbers to be too confident of that. I'm still pegging this at 70% overall. You've got some subgroups here by race. I don't want people to get too excited about this. You've got a low number here, 31%, with a wide confidence interval in the American Indian population. Again, relatively small numbers, so hard to know what to make of this. And I'm always really hesitant to draw biologic conclusions that are tied to racial identification, because we tend to go wrong when we do that. You've got 70% as expected, Asian, Black, white, and multiple races. Obviously not enough cases in the Native Hawaiian group to draw any inferences. 60% in the Hispanic group, 68% in the not Hispanic group. And when you go by region, what we're going to look for here is variant stuff, right? So what we're all worried about is this one, South Africa, where the South African variant is predominant, and some of the other vaccines have shown potentially decreased efficacy against that variant. Not seeing that here, so we'll have to look a little later on if they actually characterize the variants and of the people who got COVID-19 in this group, particularly in South Africa. I'm not sure if we're going to see that as I scan through. So this is encouraging, right? Similar efficacy, 70% in North America and South Africa, slightly lower, but probably within the range of chance variation in Latin America. So I'm still sitting us around 65, 70% efficacy, no matter how you slice it. In terms of people who have comorbidities, about 60%, 70% among people who don't have comorbidities. There's some biologic plausibility here. Maybe if you have diabetes or something like that, you don't have as robust an immune response. So that's something to look at. This is breaking down by comorbidity and age group. But the problem when you break things down this much is you get into the low case number issues where, for example, the greater than 60-year-old group with comorbidities, you've got 42% efficacy. But again, really wide confidence intervals here. Based on the low number of overall cases. So it's not quite enough to say like, oh, this vaccine's no good in people over 60 if they have comorbidities. It's just a lot of noise and variation as you're slicing and dicing. They're going to give us the individual comorbidities, but I guarantee we're not going to have enough data here. Like, look at asthma, right? Like, who knows, right? One case in the vaccine group, 9 in the placebo group for 87% efficacy, but the confidence interval goes from 7 to 99%, which is just kind of ridiculous. There's just simply not enough cases. But we're going to look at hypertension, which is a little more common. Again, hard to say what signal here. Here's obesity. This was something that a lot of people were worried about. And, because maybe obese people would need a higher dose or something like that. No real evidence here. We're still at 66, 67% efficacy in the obese population. Pretty pretty good. Diabetes was something I had just mentioned as being worried about. And what do we see here? We've got 52% and down to 23% after 28 days, but only 10 cases in the vaccine group and 13 in the placebo group. I'm like vaguely worried about this. I wish they enrolled more diabetic patients in this trial. So I don't know. We're going to have to, if this gets emergency use authorization, definitely want to keep an eye on the diabetic population who gets this vaccine and look at their COVID rates so we can have a more accurate assessment of whether this is effective. Again, look at this confidence interval from -90 all the way up to 70% within the confidence interval here. There's just not enough data in diabetes. That's frustrating. All right, well, let's move on. Okay, so now what we're looking at is based on baseline SARS-CoV-2 status. So remember how some of these people actually had an evidence of a history of coronavirus infection? So that 10% of people in the group that had that, you can see 3 of them went on to get another infection in the vaccine group and 4 in the placebo group. Not much difference there. And 1 and 2. I mean, you just don't see many infections, probably because most of these people are essentially immune. Hard to say what the efficacy is in this subgroup, but it's cool that they report it out. And of course, in the vast majority of people who didn't have prior infection, well, not vast majority, the 90% of people who didn't have prior infection, you get the 66-67% efficacy. So, all right, okay. Thanks for reporting that, Johnson & Johnson. Here's the pretty picture. So these are your Kaplan-Meier curves looking at the cases over time, the cumulative incidence. The red is the placebo group. The blue is the vaccine group. And, if we squint, we can see that these curves start to separate probably around 14 days, which makes sense, right? That's the time it's going to take to build up some immunity. But of course, not as dramatic as the Moderna or Pfizer curves, which were just like flat after that second dose of vaccine. These do continue to creep up. You do continue to get some cases, but obviously the rate is substantially lower here. All right, so what about mild disease? So remember, the primary analysis was looking at people that had to have like pretty real symptoms, and so this is looking at just milder symptoms. So you're going to have more cases here, but again, any severity, efficacy still 67, 68, 70%. That's fine. So prevents mild disease, prevents more moderate disease. What about severe disease? So severe critical was described up there, but it was like hospitalization or requirement for oxygen. Like this is like the people we actually get scared about. And overall, pretty good news here, right? So if we look at the centrally confirmed cases, 77% efficacy, 85% after 28 days. So more effective at preventing the severe disease, which of course is super important because we want to keep people out of the hospital and whatnot. No real difference, or still looks good in the younger population. Maybe not as effective in the older age group against severe disease, but very few cases. And when there's very few cases, our estimates of the efficacy are unstable. You can see the huge confidence intervals here. So sorry, but biologically speaking, this is what we have seen in all the other vaccines, right? Is more efficacy against more severe disease, which is great. Like, let's keep people out of the hospital. Let's keep people from dying. When they include those non-centrally confirmed cases, similar results. You get some extra cases, of course, which actually gives us a little bit tighter confidence intervals here, even in the greater than 60 group. So 80% after 28 days against that severe disease. We will take it. That is good news. Requiring medical intervention. Okay, so this is hospitalization, ICU admission, mechanical ventilation or ECMO, that's cardiopulmonary bypass. I mean, so this is like super sick people. And we have very few cases here, but I guess this is good news. We've got, after 14 days of vaccination, 2 in the vaccine group versus 8 in the placebo group. 0 versus 5 after 28 days, which is 100% efficacy. 0 versus 7 after 28 days with any positive PCR not centrally confirmed. So, hard. This is good, right? Like pretty good efficacy against these super severe cases. All right. So this is, what is this? First occurrence, COVID-19 requiring hospitalization. Oh, okay, so these are hospitalizations, but maybe don't require medical intervention. Um, and within 14 days and at 28 days. So very few people getting hospitalized, basically, is what you're seeing here in the very few people in the vaccine group getting hospitalized at all, which is great from a public health standpoint. All right, deaths. So really interesting here. All the deaths were in the placebo group. 100% of the deaths. There were only 7, thankfully, only 7. You can see they all had some comorbidity, mostly obesity. Something to worry about there, but all in the placebo group. All right, asymptomatic infection. So this is super cool information. So does the vaccine prevent people from transmitting the virus, without knowing? Because there's always this concern that you vaccinate someone, they don't get sick, and then they're out and about spreading virus, but they don't have symptoms, and that hurts the unvaccinated people. So what this is looking at is they don't have symptoms, but they have a positive PCR test or develops a positive antibody during the study. Okay, so that's assessed at day 1, which is pre-vaccination, day 29, and day 71. So this is interesting. Let's see what we get here. So among the people who were seronegative at baseline, that means they did not have a prior history of coronavirus infection, between day 1 and day 29, so day 1 after vaccination and that first month after vaccination, it looks like we're seeing really no effect to reduce that asymptomatic transmission, transmission. However, once you're past day 29, you've got 22 asymptomatic cases in the vaccine group and 54 in the placebo group. Among those who never had previous symptoms, 10 and 38. That is pretty good. So what we're saying here is it looks like about a month after vaccination, there's decent protection against asymptomatic transmission. That is very encouraging. Let's hope that is borne out when and if this is rolled out more widely. And some of these other subgroups are also showing that. So no real protection for that first month, at least from asymptomatic transmission. But it seems like after a month of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, your chance of transmitting asymptomatically to someone else is pretty low. That is good. Okay, all-cause mortality. So this is important, right? Because previously we had looked at COVID-associated mortality, so people who died because of COVID. But what if people die in car crashes or something, right? We want to know that too. One, because sometimes it's hard to, did they die of COVID, or did they get COVID and then get pneumonia? And, how did exactly it work? This just takes all deaths in the trial, and you've got essentially 3 people in the vaccine group dying from the time they got the shot until the end of follow-up, compared to 16 in the placebo group. So strong efficacy against all-cause mortality. We know that 10 of these placebo people, was it 10 or 9? 9 or 10 of the placebo people died, of COVID-19, and 0 died of COVID-19. But this helps you feel better that, well, I guess, one thing, what if people died from the vaccine, right? What if they got the vaccine and had anaphylaxis and died or something like that? We'll get to safety, but all right. Okay, sequencing data. So now we're on the variants. All right. So this is looking by country of participation, efficacy by country of participation, and then stratified by moderate to severe. So again, I'm looking at South Africa carefully here, and I'm seeing lower vaccine efficacy in South Africa compared to the United States after 14 days, more similar after 28 days, but pretty good efficacy against severe disease. So that's good. But where's the variant data? Here we go. Strain sequencing, 71% of centrally confirmed primary analysis cases have been sequenced. Blah, blah, blah. 73.5% of which, okay, 96.4 were identified as SARS-CoV-2 Wuhan H1 variant. In South Africa, 67% of cases have been sequenced, of which 94 were identified as 20H501YV2 variant, which is the B1351. Okay, this is the South African variant. Holy cow, 95%. Okay, so that is big news. So almost all of the COVID cases in South Africa are from that new variant, B1351, and you still have good efficacy against preventing severe critical disease and even moderate disease. That is really good news for the efficacy of this vaccine as variants come online. So positive information here. All right, efficacy done. What about safety? So important. All right. So let's talk about safety of the vaccine. So now we have participants with various definitions of adverse events. So a medically attended adverse event is something that requires a medical professional to talk to you about, at least talk to you through, and it's pretty low, 1.4%. Higher in placebo, actually, and that are related means a reasonable person would think it was related to the study drug, either vaccine or placebo. They're usually blinded to this when they adjudicate this, so they don't know if you got the vaccine. Very low numbers here. That's good. No related deaths. We've got 3 total deaths, as we saw a moment ago, in the vaccine group compared to 16 in the placebo group. No adverse events leading to study discontinuation. Okay. Now, the safety subset, I'm going to have to go back and take a look at what this special population is. I think this was a group that was targeted, I'm not sure if at random or not, but I think at random for getting more details about adverse events and things like that. So solicited local adverse reaction, that's I ask you, does your arm hurt? Half the people in the vaccine group say yes. Only 20% in the placebo group. Grade 3 is like really bad, and the numbers are pretty low. Now, systemic adverse reactions solicited, that means I ask you if you're feeling tired or fatigued or have fevers, etc., 55% versus 35%. I'm often interested in the unsolicited adverse events. These are ones that like the participant brings up themselves and says like something, I don't feel right, what's going on. You've got 13% in the vaccine group, 12% in the placebo group. Not too bad. Local adverse reactions, pain, erythema, swelling. In the safety subset, this is, basically what you'd expect. There's a fair amount of pain, 60% versus 30%. Some erythema is redness, 9% versus 5%. Some swelling, 7% versus 3%. Honestly, the local reactions haven't been that bad. I'm interested about the systemic reactions. So this is similar data. This is like time to pain and stuff. I don't care. All right, systemic adverse reactions. This is what I'm really interested in, okay? So these are like your whole body, right? The fatigue, the headache, myalgia, that's muscle aches, nausea, and fever. Again, in that safety subset population, let's look at fever, 12% versus 3%. So people are definitely getting fever. Look how many people used some ibuprofen, Tylenol or aspirin or something, right? 26% in the vaccine group, 10%. So you're feeling it. Not sure if this seems quite as bad as the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine side effects, but you got 40% of people reporting muscle aches, 44% with headaches, 44% with fatigue, about 30%. I'm sorry, that's I was comparing it to the greater than 60. Sorry, about 20% in the placebo group. So you've got 13% fever versus 1% fever. Not too bad in the greater than 60s. Yeah, it looks like the greater than 60-year-olds are having less side effects here. Maybe as evidence, like maybe they have less of a robust immune response. Okay. This is time to reaction. So like when do you get fever? You can look at it yourself. Medium time, 2 days, between 1 and 8 days. All right, sounds about right. Unsolicited adverse event. So these are things that people are reporting themselves. You've got, chills, not too many grade 3, not too many so severe, but certainly more than what you see in placebo. Actually, you see more fatigue in placebo. Interesting. A little bit of vaccination site pain. All right, not huge numbers here. So we'll see. I'm getting the vibe that we might not see quite as terrible side effects with this as we did with the mRNA vaccines. So now we get to some interesting stuff. Okay, so the reporting system captures all sorts of medical complications that might not have anything to do with the vaccine at all. But one thing they noticed was a numerical imbalance, this is their term, not mine, between the amount of blood clots in the vaccine group and the control group. So there were 15 cases in the vaccine group and 10 in the placebo group. So you see placebo, they order them by vaccine. So deep vein thrombosis, deep vein thrombosis, deep vein thrombosis. Many of them being reported as unrelated, but of course, there's no you might not think before you saw the data that a deep vein thrombosis would be related to the vaccine, but if you saw that it happened more often in the vaccine, then your mind might be like, oh, well, wait, maybe there's some way that I can explain why this would happen. And so you see deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, that's blood clot in the lung. Transverse sinus thrombosis, that's a vein in the brain. And a cerebral infarct, that's a stroke. In the placebo group, you've got deep vein thrombosis, some pulmonary embolism, and then some heart attacks and stuff. You're not seeing quite as much deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. Very rare, right? 15 out of 22,000 people. Something to think about. Could it be that people are not feeling great and they're lying around and not walking, and that's why they're having deep vein thromboses? Maybe. Should we be encouraging people, keep up, keep your legs moving and stuff like that? It's not enough data to say. It could just be random chance, but I'm glad they reported this, and it's something we obviously will need to look out for if there's going to be a wide-scale rollout of this vaccine. And then the other weird one that they report on here are cases of tinnitus that's ringing in the ears. 6 cases, all of them in the vaccine group. This is not terribly serious, but it's weird, right? That they all had tinnitus is a weird thing to kind of pop up. You can see that most of them were reported as unrelated, but that is just kind of like that's like your opinion, man, right? So another thing to watch out for, again, 6 out of 22,000, not terrible. Most of them have resolved. So we'll see. But it's good, obviously, to look out for this when we're talking about safety. This gets into a little bit more details about the deaths. So 2 of the deaths in the vaccine group were respiratory infections that weren't COVID-19. One with pneumonia, and one with a lung abscess who also had HIV. And then a 66-year-old died of unknown causes after waking up with shortness of breath. One wonders about that, considering the DVT pulmonary embolism table we just looked at. So we might want to ask Johnson & Johnson if they ever determined the cause of death of that person, because that certainly would be important. And then you've got some people in the placebo group who died, one of suicide, pneumonia. And these are things that people die of. When you have 22,000 people, you are going to have people die. That's just, people do die. But we certainly want to make sure, and obviously less people died in the vaccine group, which is critical, but I think we should know a little bit more about this. Other non-fatal serious adverse events, you've got, let's see, a Guillain-Barré syndrome, a facial paralysis. Some things were resolved. These are likely related. And then some in the placebo group. So again, nothing much here. There's only a few cases here and there. But we do see Guillain-Barré syndrome after vaccines. That does happen. You see it every once in a while, the flu vaccine, very rare. So there's more details on that here if you want to read into it. Pregnancies, people always ask about. Pregnant women were excluded, but people do get pregnant, even if you tell them not to. So 4 in the vaccine, 4 in the placebo. And it looks like, what do we have? In the pregnancy, in the vaccine group, we have 1 spontaneous abortion. That's a miscarriage. 1 threatened miscarriage. Wait, is this? Oh, I'm sorry. 1 one miscarriage in the vaccine group, none in the placebo group. One threatened miscarriage in the placebo group, none in the vaccine group. Two elective abortions in the placebo group, which obviously, is not going to be related. One ectopic pregnancy in the vaccine group. Who knows about safety? Just have to see. They looked at rabbits. No adverse effects on female reproduction in rabbits. Okay. Okay. One final thought, which I love about this, the J&J says if FDA gives them emergency use authorization, they will allow their placebo group to get vaccinated, which is great. That's the appropriate move, and this is their sort of algorithm for how that's going to work. But I'm happy about that. So excellent. Well, that has been a whirlwind tour of the new data on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Overall, very good news. A couple of questions. I would anticipate that this will get an emergency use authorization on Friday, but we'll see. And obviously some interesting things to follow as it comes out. But broadly, this is positive. I'm optimistic. One more weapon in the fight against COVID. Thanks for staying with me. Oh, supposed to say, like and subscribe, and you can find me on Twitter at @FPerryWilson. All right, take care.